What would happen if you walked into your quiet, suburban garage, threw away every single blueprint ever written about motorcycle engineering, and decided to build a two-wheeled machine completely designed around a chemical compound that is officially classified as a highly volatile explosive weapon? Close your eyes and picture a scene that defies all conventional logic and rational human thought. You are standing near the starting line of a desolate, sun-scorched drag strip in the heart of America. The air is so incredibly thick with toxic fumes that it physically burns your eyes and makes the back of your throat taste like battery acid and melted copper. You are not just smelling standard high-octane racing fuel, you are inhaling the heavy, suffocating exhaust of a custom-built machine that consumes pure nitromethane. And sitting directly on top of this mechanical nuclear reactor is a single man. A solitary mechanical genius who built every single component of this terrifying motorcycle with his own two bare hands. We are not talking about a shiny, factory-backed superbike, and we are not talking about a highly sanitized, computer-controlled racing machine built by a massive corporate team of Ivy League aerospace engineers. We are talking about America's most dangerous motorcycle, a completely bespoke, 1,000-plus horsepower monster conceived entirely within the brilliant, unhinged mind of one lone builder. To understand the sheer terror of this machine, you have to forget absolutely everything you think you know about motorcycles and fundamental physics. A normal, modern high-performance motorcycle engine produces maybe 200 horsepower on a very good day. The mechanical abomination sitting heavily on the starting line in front of you produces well over 1,500 horsepower. It is a machine that does not simply accelerate down the track. It violently teleports from the starting line to the finish line in a fraction of a second, leaving a trail of shattered eardrums, completely vaporized rubber, and terrified spectators in its wake. But the most fascinating part of this apocalyptic machine is not the explosive fuel it burns, nor the terrifying record-breaking speeds it reaches. The true story, the narrative that will absolutely haunt you, lies deep within the psychology of the solitary genius who looked at the absolute limits of physical engineering, laughed directly in the face of insurmountable danger, and decided to push the boundary until it almost killed him. But how does a single human mind, working completely alone in a drafty, oil-stained American garage, actually tame a chemical compound that actively wants to destroy everything it touches? To comprehend the absolute genius of this solitary builder, you first must intimately understand the terrifying nature of the monster he was trying to feed. The fuel of choice for America's most dangerous bike is nitromethane, a liquid so volatile it is often used in industrial mining explosives, unlike standard racing gasoline, which requires a massive mixture of atmospheric oxygen pulled from the air to properly combust. Nitromethane chemically carries its own oxygen supply directly within its molecular structure. This terrifying chemical reality means you can pack an ungodly, completely irrational amount of liquid fuel directly into the engine's combustion chamber. When the spark plug fires, the nitromethane does not simply burn like normal gas. It violently detonates with a concussive shockwave that can effortlessly shatter a standard engine block into 1,000,000 pieces if the internal tolerances are off by even a fraction of a millimeter. The mechanical genius behind this motorcycle knew that a standard cast aluminum motorcycle engine would instantly vaporize under this kind of immense, apocalyptic internal pressure. He knew that if he tried to modify a factory engine, it would become a lethal pipe bomb positioned mere inches beneath his chest. So, what did he do? He did not order custom heavy-duty parts from a racing catalog, because a catalog for this specific level of mechanical insanity simply did not exist anywhere on the planet. Instead, he purchased massive, incredibly heavy, solid blocks of aerospace-grade billet aluminum, working completely isolated from the rest of the racing world. Deep into the lonely hours of the night, he stood over a loud, whirring industrial lathe and meticulously machined his own custom engine block entirely from scratch. He painstakingly carved out the cylinder banks, designed his own heavily reinforced connecting rods, and built custom pistons that looked like they belonged in a massive diesel locomotive rather than a two-wheeled racing vehicle. He was not just acting as a mechanic, he was acting as a rogue alchemist, a mad scientist forging a completely untested mechanical heart capable of withstanding internal explosions that would rival a military-grade artillery shell. He knew with absolute certainty that if his mathematical calculations were wrong, if a single titanium bolt was under-torqued, or if a microscopic hairline fracture existed anywhere within that billet aluminum, the engine would violently detonate and end his life in a fraction of a second. So, you have somehow managed to machine an engine block strong enough to contain a continuous, violent explosion without instantly turning into high-velocity shrapnel. But how on earth do you transfer thousands of horsepower to a single rubber tire without the entire machine instantly disintegrating or violently flipping backward into the asphalt? This is where the true brilliance of the mechanical genius shines the brightest, and where the inherent danger of the motorcycle reaches an entirely new, deeply terrifying level. In a normal vehicle, you have a transmission with multiple gears and a standard clutch system to slowly engage the power. But when you are dumping 1,500 horsepower through a narrow motorcycle chassis, a standard transmission is completely useless. It would be instantly ripped to shreds, snapping hardened steel gear teeth as if they were made of brittle glass. The solitary builder realized very early on that traditional gears were a fatal weakness. So, in a stroke of absolute madness, he eliminated the transmission entirely. Instead, he engineered a completely custom, highly complex multi-stage centrifugal clutch system that operated purely on kinetic physics and rotational mass. This clutch was a masterpiece of lethal, uncompromising engineering. It was designed to slowly, mechanically engage entirely on its own as the engine revolutions increased, meticulously slipping just enough to keep the massive motorcycle from instantly flipping backward, but gripping hard enough to propel the machine forward with absolutely neck-snapping violence. The clutch itself was a spinning disc of pure terror, housed inside a thick, bulletproof titanium bell housing. The builder knew that the friction plates inside this custom clutch would generate so much intense heat during a 6-second drag run that they would literally melt and weld themselves together if they were not perfectly calibrated. He spent hundreds of grueling, exhausting hours calculating the exact gram weight of the centrifugal fingers, machining each tiny component by hand, testing and retesting until his hands literally bled and his vision blurred. He was building a mechanical nervous system for a machine that possessed absolutely no brain, forcing raw explosive torque to behave in a perfectly straight, highly predictable line. The margin for error was absolutely zero. If the clutch locked up just 1/10 of a second too early, the massive spinning rear slick tire would instantly bite into the track. The front of the motorcycle would violently launch into the air, and the rider would be brutally crushed to death under 1,000 pounds of highly explosive, custom-machined metal. But what happens to the human psyche when the very machine you are pouring your entire soul into violently turns against you before it even touches the asphalt? Imagine spending 6 excruciating months painstakingly machining an engine block, cutting the heavy aluminum, calculating the exact internal tolerances, and finally bolting the massive, supercharged multi-cylinder nitro setup together in the quiet, sacred sanctuary of your own garage. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. The neighborhood is completely silent, completely unaware of the monster sleeping next door. The mechanical genius decides to perform a static fire test, just to ensure that the custom fuel injection system is accurately delivering the highly volatile nitromethane into the massive combustion chambers. He locks the motorcycle down to a heavy steel testing rig, bolts it securely to the solid concrete floor, and engages the motorized starter. For a split second, the engine roars to life, producing a magnificent, deafening symphony of raw mechanical perfection. But then, an incredibly microscopic flaw in the custom fuel delivery line, a flaw no thicker than a single human hair, causes an uneven mixture of oxygen and pure nitro to pool dangerously inside the second cylinder. The resulting detonation does not push the heavy piston down. It violently blows the massive cylinder head straight off the engine block. The heavy chunk of billet aluminum shoots upward like a high-velocity cannonball, completely obliterating the ceiling of the garage and raining heavy, jagged shrapnel down on the enclosed workspace. The concussive shockwave instantly shatters every single window in the building, throwing the builder violently against the back wall. The garage instantly fills with thick, toxic, choking white smoke, and the terrifying sound of hissing, superheated metal heavily echoes in the dark, as the intense ringing in his ears slowly begins to fade, and he painstakingly picks himself up off the cold, debris-covered concrete floor, bleeding from the shrapnel cuts and completely covered in heavy grease and toxic soot. What exactly does he do? Does he call it quits? Does he admit that the project is simply too dangerous, too incredibly volatile, and mathematically impossible for one solitary man to conquer? No. A normal person would walk away forever. But the mind of a true mechanical genius is wired entirely differently. He looks at the completely shattered, smoking ruin of his masterpiece, wipes the blood from his forehead, and immediately begins calculating exactly what went wrong. He does not see a catastrophic failure. He sees a violent, incredibly necessary lesson in high-pressure fluid dynamics. The very next morning, he is right back at the lathe, sweeping up the broken glass, ordering a fresh block of solid aerospace aluminum, and starting the entire grueling, months-long process completely from scratch. What exactly happens to the fragile human anatomy when you violently unleash 1,500 horsepower on a two-wheeled vehicle that weighs significantly less than the engine itself? Let me take you directly into the mind of the mechanical genius on the fateful day he finally decided to completely test his apocalyptic creation in public. It is race day at the National Drag Strip. The grandstands are packed tightly with thousands of spectators who have heard wild, exaggerated rumors of the garage-built monster, but nobody really understands the sheer magnitude of what they are about to witness. Imagine the absolute shock on the faces of the factory-backed corporate racing teams. They roll into the drag strip with million-dollar customized semi-trucks, teams of credentialed engineers wearing matching polo shirts, and expensive laptops full of advanced telemetry software. And then, parked directly next to them in the dusty dirt lot, is a single man with a rusty pickup truck, a basic set of well-worn hand tools, and a motorcycle that looks like it was violently forged in the absolute depths of hell. The builder wheels the massive, incredibly long, deeply menacing machine into the staging lanes. The motorcycle is stripped completely bare of any cosmetic fairings or aerodynamic bodywork. It is nothing but raw billet metal, massive exhaust pipes, a heavy-duty rear tire, and a giant, ominous supercharger bolted securely to the top of the engine block. There is no simple starter button on this machine. To start an engine with this much internal compression, an external motorized starter cart has to literally force the massive engine to turn over. When the mechanical genius casually signals his crew chief, the starter engages. The engine coughs, sputters, and then, with an ear-splitting, concussive boom, the nitromethane ignites. The sound is completely indescribable. It does not sound like a machine, it sounds like the earth itself is violently tearing open. The exhaust flames shoot 3 feet out of the completely unbaffled pipes, glowing a vibrant, highly toxic shade of bright yellow and green. The concussive shock waves coming off the engine are so incredibly violent that they physically blur the vision of anyone standing within 20 feet of the exhaust. The ground shakes, dust dances wildly on the asphalt, and the sheer volume of the noise triggers an involuntary fight or flight response in the human brain. The builder, wearing a custom-fitted fire-resistant suit and a heavy helmet, swings his leg over the absolute death trap he meticulously created. He is not just a rider, he is the sole architect of his own potential demise. He rolls the heavy machine into the water box to do a massive burnout, heating the giant rear tire until it turns to sticky, molten rubber. The thick white smoke completely envelops him. The harsh smell of burning nitro and vaporizing rubber completely fills the air, choking the spectators in the front rows. He is entirely alone in this terrifying moment. The thousands of screaming fans fade into a distant, muffled hum. There is only the violent vibration of the billet aluminum engine actively trying to tear itself off the chassis, the heavy, labored breathing inside his helmet, and the terrifying realization that in exactly 5 seconds, he is going to deliberately open the throttle on the most dangerous motorcycle ever constructed on American soil. If you were sitting directly on top of a highly explosive machine, with your chest pressed tightly against a massive supercharger housing that is spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, what would be your final thought before the starting lights flash green? When the light drops, the mechanical genius does not just twist the throttle, he completely unleashes hell on earth. The custom centrifugal clutch he designed in his lonely garage engages with absolutely terrifying mathematical precision. In the very first second of acceleration, the motorcycle pulls nearly 3 units of gravitational force. To put that into perspective, that is more acceleration force than an astronaut experiences during a space shuttle launch, and he is experiencing it while precariously balancing on a completely unshielded machine with only 2 wheels. The raw acceleration is so incredibly violent that the blood is literally pushed entirely out of the frontal lobe of his brain, severely threatening to cause him to instantly black out. The front wheel hovers 2 inches off the asphalt, violently skimming the surface as the massive rear tire actually expands in diameter from the intense rotational velocity. He is not steering the motorcycle in any traditional sense. He is violently wrestling it, fighting the incredible torque that desperately wants to twist the entire chassis completely sideways. Within just 3 seconds, he is traveling over 150 miles per hour. The wind resistance hits his chest like a solid wall of concrete, actively trying to peel his heavy leather gloves right off the handlebars. The noise is absolutely deafening. A high-pitched scream of supercharged air violently mixed with the apocalyptic rapid-fire detonation of pure nitromethane. Every single structural weld, every single custom titanium bolt, every single piece of billet aluminum he painstakingly machined in his garage is being subjected to maximum, torturous mechanical stress. If a single structural weld fails right now, the motorcycle will instantly snap in half, sending him tumbling across the rough, unforgiving asphalt at over 200 miles per hour. His vision slowly begins to blur into a narrow, terrifying tunnel. The world around him completely vanishes, replaced entirely by a gray, violently vibrating streak of pure forward momentum. He is operating completely on pure, unadulterated instinct, trusting his life entirely to the mechanical integrity of a machine he built by hand in a dimly lit shed. He violently crosses the finish line in a fraction over 6 seconds, the electronic timing boards flashing an unbelievable physics-defying speed of over 230 miles per hour. He has achieved the completely impossible. He has thoroughly conquered physics. But the extreme danger is far from over, because now he has to somehow figure out how to safely stop the most dangerous bike in America before he completely runs out of track. But what happens when the relentless pursuit of ultimate speed pushes a mechanical genius to the absolute terrifying edge of human endurance? And how do you physically stop a two-wheeled missile before you completely run out of track? Stopping a 1,000-pound, two-wheeled missile from 230 miles per hour is an entirely different kind of psychological nightmare. At that immense speed, the front brakes are completely and utterly useless. If he grabs the front brake lever even a fraction of a millimeter too hard, the front tire will instantly lock up. The bike will violently cartwheel into the concrete retaining walls, and he will be instantly crushed into an unrecognizable state. Instead, he has to rely on pure aerodynamic drag and custom-built, military-grade parachutes. He blindly hits the parachute release lever located near his left hand, and a massive blossom of heavy nylon violently explodes into the air behind him, yanking the heavy motorcycle backward with enough sheer kinetic force to violently snap his neck if he is not physically prepared for the brutal, sudden deceleration. As the heavy machine finally slows to a halt at the absolute dusty edge of the track, the massive engine still coughing and spitting toxic flames from the exhaust, the mechanical genius sits up. His chest is heavily heaving, his muscles are completely locked in a state of tetany and absolute exhaustion, and his body is completely drained of all adrenaline. When he slowly rides the smoking machine back to the pit area, there is no massive corporate team waiting for him with champagne and cameras. There is no highly paid team of software engineers downloading computer telemetry to analyze the run. There is just him, a basic set of hand tools, and a burning hot engine that needs to be completely torn down, meticulously inspected, and completely rebuilt before the next run. This is the unseen, agonizing reality of building and riding America's most dangerous motorcycle. It is a lonely life of extreme isolation, immense financial strain, and permanent, unrelenting physical danger. The public only sees the glory, the unbelievable 6-second passes, the massive exhaust flames, and the incredible, deafening noise. What they do not see are the countless, painful nights the genius spent sleeping on the cold, oily concrete floor of his garage, staring blankly at a broken engine block, trying to figure out exactly why the internal pressure blew the cylinder heads clean off during a test run. They do not see the massive, deeply rooted psychological toll of knowing that every single time you purposely swing your leg over your own mechanical creation, you have a statistically significant chance of never walking back into your garage again. Why do we remain so deeply captivated by the stories of men who willingly build machines that are mathematically designed to kill them? It is because these lone mechanical geniuses represent the absolute purest, most unfiltered form of human rebellion. They are not merely rebelling against polite society. They are directly rebelling against the fundamental laws of nature, against gravity, against friction, and against the very concept of human mortality. The man who built America's most dangerous motorcycle did not do it for the money, because there is absolutely no amount of prize money on Earth that justifies the horrifying risk of strapping your fragile body directly to a nitromethane bomb. He did not do it for the fame, because the people who truly understand the magnitude of his engineering genius are a very small, niche group of fellow madmen who operate in the shadows of the racing world. He did it simply because he looked at the distant horizon of what was considered physically possible, and he took it as a deeply personal insult. He wanted to know exactly what lay entirely beyond the edge of rational thought. Today, his custom-built, 1,000-horsepower motorcycle might sit quietly behind velvet ropes in a museum, or it might be tucked safely away under a dusty, heavy tarp in a dark corner of a private garage, its massive exhaust pipes finally cold, the toxic, lingering smell of nitromethane slowly fading into history. But the incredibly profound legacy of the machine and the solitary man who built it remains utterly terrifying and profoundly inspiring. He definitively proved that you do not need a multi-million-dollar factory budget to completely change the world of motorsport. You do not need a massive team of highly educated scientists to completely shatter world records. All you need is an unyielding, burning obsession, a heavy industrial lathe, a welding torch, a completely blatant disregard for your own personal safety, and the absolute, unwavering conviction that your own two hands can build a machine capable of outrunning the devil himself. So the very next time you hear the distant, high-pitched scream of a racing engine tearing through the air, take a moment to look completely past the smoke, the speed, and the noise. Think deeply about the lonely, grease-stained hands that meticulously put those heavy pieces of metal together. Think about the profound, terrifying isolation of the solitary genius who boldly dared to harness the raw power of a catastrophic explosion, just to see exactly how fast it could carry him before the rest of the world finally caught up.